Fling open the city gates. The king is coming, and we want to be ready. Shouts go out across Jerusalem, and excitement begins to stir. The king is coming. He's returning after having been away a long time. It's exciting, and there is a lot to do in preparation. Think of the scenes from Downton Abbey, where the staff in the London house must suddenly rush about when they learn that the Earl of Grantham and Lady Mary are coming into town from their country estate. Servants scurry to air out the parlor, remove sheets covering the furniture, buy more food for the larder. The servants hope they can beat the clock to be ready before the family descends, before that head butler, Mr. Carson, runs his white glove along the mantel, checking for dust. In my own childhood, the annual visit from my grandparents filled me with this flurry of excitement. They lived so far away that we only saw them at most twice a year. At school, the day that I thought they were arriving, I'd be filled with anticipation, deep in my lessons, and then suddenly looking up in the middle to check the hands on the clock and see how soon I could race home, watching on every block for their car. Would it be in the driveway yet after that long drive, hundreds of miles? At home, our house would be all lit up, good smells coming from the kitchen, and a tray standing ready with empty glasses and small plates that we used to serve refreshments to my grandparents as soon as they arrived. As I got older, I would be the one to carry that tray. For days before they arrived, I'd be cleaning my room and polishing the dining room table and raking up leaves in the yard. We did our best to prepare for these grandparents so that they would feel welcome when they arrived, and maybe a bit so that they wouldn't find anything amiss, worthy of critique. Throughout the Bible, too, we hear allusions to both of these feelings, that energized preparation for the high and the mighty one arriving, and also the people's uneasiness at being found napping rather than alert and ready. The Old Testament prophets, Isaiah and Baruch, and that newcomer, John the Baptist, all talk about preparing the way of the Lord, making it smooth and straight so that the king can travel more easily, so all of God's people can travel more easily on a level surface, returning to Jerusalem. Every valley shall be filled, every mountain and hill made low, the crooked ways made straight, the rough places smooth. And once Jerusalem is in sight for the coming travelers, then the city gates must be flung open wide. The one coming, this King of glory, is so majestic, so large, that he surpasses even the size of the city gates designed for mere humans. You see, the gates were only small breaks in those thick city walls, essentially short tunnels through the walls, tunnels large enough for people and carts to come through. But when the King of glory comes, we'll need to raise the roof on those gates. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, so the King of glory may come in. Indeed, the psalm we read today, Psalm 24, may have been written for King David or Solomon, bringing back into Jerusalem the holy ark of God. It was a box that was carried on 2 poles containing the tablets of the 10 Commandments, people said. But that ark was just envisioned as God's footstool, and God sat invisible on a throne above it. The ark could get through Jerusalem's gates, but for God himself will raise the roofs of the gates to let the King of glory enter. In the Middle East today, you can see the King's Highway, the Way. It was an actual road, a major trade route that ran down from the Mesopotamian capital of Babylon in Iraq now, down to the Red Sea and Egypt. Israel had always sat in that swath of land lying between the great powers and continents. There was Europe, and then, of course, Asia on the north, and Africa to the south. Back and forth, the great empires have always marched through Israel and through the Levant, seeking to control that little piece of land and to control the two major highways that ran through it. One trade route, the highway of the sea, runs along the Mediterranean coast, but the other one, the other ancient trade route that was always called the King's Highway, lies further inland, running up the eastern border of Israel, between the Jordan River and the desert. Ancient lore had Abraham traveling down that route from the Fertile Crescent over to the Promised Land of Israel. And several millennia later, Moses tries to come back north on this route, leading the people up from Egypt back into the Promised Land, wandering first, but then trying to get in through Edom, and isn't allowed. When the Romans controlled the area, Emperor Trajan rebuilt the same King's Highway so his troops could move more swiftly throughout his domain. Hills were lowered under Trajan. Valleys were raised on the King's Highway, Trajan's Nova Via Regia, keeping it in readiness for the king's, the emperor's travels. In our own country, there was a King's Highway too. British King Charles II required his governors to build a road that ran from Boston here, from Boston in the north, down through New York City, and then to Charlestown, South Carolina. This colonial King's Highway followed a path that had originally been laid out by natives, worn by their walking. In the 1600s, the first half of it from Boston to New York lay where we now find Routes 1 and Interstate 95. Now today we level roads with bulldozers and blast out hills, even mountains with dynamite, but in the days past, to make straight the King's Highway meant hard labor for the soldiers or slaves or immigrants required to do the work, either here in the U.S. or in the ancient Israel and Mesopotamia. So when a prophet like John the Baptist or Baruch or Isaiah shouted out that the highway had to be made ready for the king, the people listening knew it meant strenuous work and preparation. Preparing for the king was not just a pretty metaphor. How about us? What needs dusting or even dynamite in your life? Advent, these 4 weeks before Christmas, is known as the season to prepare for the coming of God. What could we do to be more ready? What is it that we're even getting ready for? How do you feel about a king riding up the hill towards Jerusalem, where we've been already making our home? Do the Crawley servants in London feel only delight at the prospect of the Earl and Lady Grantham moving down to London with Mr. Carson, the butler, and his critical eye? For many of us, our lives, our center cities, as it were, are fortified with gates like Jerusalem. And we usually are quite judicious about whom we let in and whom we keep out. There's a good reason that we have a thick wall around Jerusalem to protect it from unwanted invaders. Likewise, there's a good reason we keep boundaries in our lives and around our country. Because the entrance of this King of Kings, the one he plans to make at Christmas, is not simply the arrival of an innocent, unthreatening babe who easily can be carried off by his meek mother if he gets too loud or needs a diaper change. A very adult King of Kings will be arriving at our gates, and he has plans for our lives. He plans to make all the difference in your life, to move right in and live with you, inside you. The Bach cantata sung by our choir said that we open ourselves, our entire hearts, as Jesus enters, so we become his dwelling. In the hymn we sang, "Come thou long expected Jesus," we sang, "Born thy people to deliver, born, a child, and yet a king, born to reign in us forever. The king is not coming just for the fashionable London season like the Crawleys. He's planning to reign in us forever and to deliver us, to liberate us from old ways of living that we've set up, our old secure walls, where we see secure walls protecting us. He sees prison walls behind which we may have locked ourselves, and he's willing to help us break out of jail. The jails of worry that we don't fit in. Jails of inadequacy that we have little worth, or for some, the jail of pride that bars us from seeing others' gifts. Tell me, now that you've heard a bit more about this King of Kings who will be arising, is this whole upcoming arrival beginning to sound a little less exciting, less enticing? Now that you've heard about all the prep beforehand and the newfound guest who will never leave, your whole routine upended, the back-breaking work of making the road straight, shoving around dirt, flinging open our gates, and then tending to the King who reigns supreme over us, honestly, are you starting to weigh the pros and cons? In some ways, we consider the pros and cons of life with the holy every day, whether or not we do it consciously. Every day we make some kind of judgment about whether we'll treat others with dignity and respect, even when they don't treat us that way. While we're driving down our highways and get cut off, do we respond in kind? When we're at work and have our comments cut off and interrupted, when a family member or friend cuts us off due to a real or an imagined slight, and we have to decide whether they'll get a Christmas card this year, even though we don't expect one in return. Over and over, we have chances to decide how to live, to decide who are you, what do you stand for? Are you defined first by where you went to school or by how kind you try to be? Are you known for your possessions or your generosity? Are you able to rehearse all the wrongs that have been done against you, or do you forgive easily, letting God be the judge, assuming you may not know the whole story? The King of Kings offers us one way of life, and other kings in other competing kingdoms offer alternatives. We get to choose. Tell me, think about what happened to the Christians in Germany during the time of the Nazis. They had to decide whether it would be Kristallnacht or Silent Night. Christians had to decide also in the past whether the white robes would represent the Ku Klux Klan, as some Christians claimed, or those who sang at Christmas, "Go Tell It" on the mountain in their choir robes. And today we need to decide, is Islam only what we see on the news of ISIS beheading others, or do you know as much and even more about the nativity scene in the Quran, where Jesus is born to Mary and revered? We have choices. The King of Kings stands at our door and knocks and waits to see if we will open the gate to a new way of living, one that does free us from prejudice and opens our hearts to great warmth and love. Even on Christmas Day, the baby won't force himself on us. We can either make room at the inn, or send him away. Can we ever prepare enough for the King of Kings to enter our lives? You, like me, may be always a bit nervous about the chief butler who you imagine accompanies God, the one with that white glove test, whose eyebrows shoot out from his forehead when he sees the mess within me. Because I know that on the outside I can look orderly enough, but dig into my closets or my kitchen drawers, and that butler will unearth biases I'm ashamed of. Words I've said that are hurtful. High standards that can be cruel, and fear that can overwhelm my desire to love. Am I ready for the King of Kings to be poking around? No, I'm not ready. Am I worthy to receive him into my home or my heart through my gates? No, I'm not ready. But when he knocks at the gate, will I let him in? With your help, yes. And by God's grace, you see, all of us here get to help one another prepare for the coming of the King of Kings. No one does it alone. No road was ever built by just one person. No mountain was ever leveled by one alone. Jesus never asked his disciples to act alone. He gathered them as 12 and sent them out always 2 by 2. For the first disciples, when the worst that the world could ever do had been done to Jesus, an innocent man tortured and killed on a cross, it was when the disciples came back together that they experienced the King of Kings alive with them again. Together they finally understood that of course they would fall and fail, but God would never fail them. They would never be cleaned up enough, prepared enough to be truly worthy of the King's visit, but it didn't matter one bit. The King was standing at their door and knocking anyway, inside their hearts again, with them again. God didn't love them because they were worthy. They were worthy because God loved them. Love strong enough to level our mountains of fear and prejudice, to raise us up from our valleys of despair, when gunshots kill the innocent far too often. Alone we'll never be convinced of this good news of the power of love. But together, when we share what we've known and experienced along the roads we travel, even around this table today, all of us kneeling as one, then we discover again a King of love for whom we want to fling open our gates and before whom we'll be willing to kneel with the shepherds come Christmas morn.